All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics. My name is Troy, aka Keep Troy Blue. With me, as always, is Cathy Cannon, aka Cannon's Fodder. A little bit later, we have a very special guest joining us on the show. We haven't had a guest in a while, Cathy. This one's pretty cool. Can you tell us who's coming on in a little bit?
We will have from the Ninth Judicial Circuit of Florida, former state attorney Monique Worrell, who has made national headlines, having been removed by Ron DeSantis from her office for being a Democrat. I think was probably what it was, but
She's too woke.
it's obviously it. So we're gonna have her on the show. She's gonna talk about what that whole thing was like, the aftermath of that, whether Andrew Warren, who's the other prosecutor in the state who was removed by DeSantis, what impact that is going to have on her case, the whole shebang, as well as some laughs at the demise of his presidential campaign, because I've been dying to talk to a Floridian about that. Because only Floridians understand,
Yeah,
Floridians.
get a exclusive look at Monique Worrell's reaction to Ronnie D dropping out of the race there. Maybe exclusive. She's probably told other people first, but
I'm sure she. I mean, she's got a case going to the state Supreme Court, so it's been heard of.
It's been heard of. Well, we're very excited to have Monique on. She's going to be on in a little bit. We're going to get to some news stories here. Shit show at the border. First of all, Republicans scuttling the border effort, but there was a trucker convoy that headed to their trucker convoy. I can't keep track of them. There's one in Germany, I guess. They're all over the place.
Well, there's one in Canada. They tried one to DC that went nowhere. Canada, remember, it was like this whole embarrassing thing in like 2020. The truckers didn't want vaccines or some shit. I don't even know.
Yeah, the Canada one was like, we don't want to vaccinate. I'm like, okay. Yeah. I mean, you do work by yourself in a car.
An American policy. Okay. I know. No, what was funny about it is that they were protesting at the Canadian Capitol a policy of the American government they were unhappy about, because it meant that they couldn't ship their Canadian goods to America because America required them to have a vaccine. So they were protesting the Canadian government. It was all kinds of super fun. Like,
how did you feel about that as a Canadian? Did they represent you well?
I'm a Canadian, but I'm not. Like, I was born there. I lived there till I was 3. I have a birth certificate that will save me from the camps if I need it. But I mean, when I like birth its weight in gold. But to me, I'm Canadian, but it's the Commonwealth. To me, I'm British because I was just it was the Commonwealth, right?
Yeah.
It still was when I was there. Like it was still like legit under the authority of the crown. There's like a picture of baby Cathy going to the Parliament building to watch the Queen sign it over, right? So I'm Canadian.
Definitely. You were there, yeah.
I mean, I do like Tim Hortons coffee. I'll give you that.
You were there for a minute before you fled to the colonies, but now you might be fleeing back.
Fled to the colonies. Yeah, but I'll go back because the planet is melting and they'll finally have warm weather.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting. We have American MAGA. They're gearing up in their trucks and they're heading down to the border. Problem is that event kind of fizzled out real quickly. They found out when they arrived near Houston, they thought they were going down to the border to like enforce some sort of order at the border. That sounds fun. Which, by the way, they did that back in the day in Arizona. They had the that militia that like showed up at the border. I wonder where those guys are. I keep waiting for those guys.
Because that sheriff guy, like the guy who's the Show Me Your Papers sheriff. I can't remember his name.
Joe, Show Me Your Papers, Arpaio.
Yeah, Arpaio.
He's like in jail now.
Yeah, which is telling about how those people are, right?
He was a psycho. Holy shit. These guys, however, it didn't go as well. They found out near Houston at their little rally that they weren't actually going down to the border. They were just going to have like a Christian revival pep rally. They went to a children's ranch where they were going to have prayer and exercise their First Amendment rights by having a redress of grievances against an out-of-control federal government, end quote. The organizer said that God is in control, so he can't tell them exactly what it's going to look like when they got down there. So it ended up being sort of a grifting operation. They were supposed to have Ted Nugent play. They got all these people down there. No one showed up, first of all, so they were like pinging away. They were like pinging away on Twitter messages trying to get people to come down. So it didn't go well. They found out real quick that it was more of just a grifting operation for the groups that organized it. Here's a video of one of the women who ended up down there, and she is pissed. She's really, really angry about
Christians. Do not be deceived. Stop thinking that everybody who waves a flag and shouts freedom is your friend and a good person, because we have people like this trying to join up in the movements. I found this out the hard way. I found it out the hard way. That not everybody is in things for the same reasons you are. I was in the People's Convoy, and what a fucking disappointment that ended up being. What a disappointment to find out that these people that you were with, they weren't like you. They didn't care about the country. They were a bunch of grifting motherfucking live streamers that wanted to make money off the people in America who were hardworking and sending their money, little old ladies, old men, people who had to wait for their paychecks so they could give a little bit of money to help people drive around and shout freedom and fight for freedom. And to find out that it was really for nothing.
Yeah. Wow.
Shocking. It's almost as though we spent an entire 2020 election campaign telling them those exact things, and they called us a bunch of woke liberals. I want to feel bad for her.
I want to feel sorry for her. I have this I have this sort of crisis in my head right now because I want to feel sorry for them, but I don't. I don't. I really don't.
It's like, don't touch the stove, okay? The stove will burn your hand. They touch the stove, cry that their hand is burned, and want me to feel bad for them being hurt. Fuck off. I told you not to touch the stove. Take care of your burned hand yourself. This is your bed. Sleep in it. Right? Like, no, I'm done. Like, I tried to warn them. I tried over and over and over again to warn them. I was told to get educated. I was told that Google is free, right? I was told I was brainwashed. Who's brainwashed now, right? It's fine.
Yeah.
I enjoy watching comeuppance come up.
It's almost like people like that are easy to prey on by the grifters. It's almost like some people base their entire career and political aspirations off of that fact. Some of them did break away and go down to the border. They went down to Eagle Pass. It was reported that they did not see an invasion of migrants. They saw a few migrants come through while they were down there. But it was not quite the just migrant horde that's constantly played on Fox News with millions of people. And by the way, those videos of like millions of people crossing the border, those are down. Generally, those videos are taken in southern Mexico. Those are Central Americans crossing into Mexico. Those videos, not people crossing into the United States.
And they get away with it because they're not technically lying to you because they say it's the Mexican border, right? Yeah. They just don't tell you which one. So, it's not fake news. It's just misleading news.
It's Central and South Americans crossing into North America across the Mexican border. Well, yeah, technically that's true, I guess. But that is not to the Texas border. So one woman said, quote, "It's not what I expected, but then again, I don't know what I expected." She sounds very thoughtful. "I can tell you it's not as bad as what I thought." So that's kind of eye-opening in itself too, end quote. So we have grifting operations, these poor people just being taken advantage of. This trucker convoy completely fell apart. It amounted to nothing. Almost nobody showed up. So just and then they got down there and they realized it's not as, again, to be fair, there is a problem at the border. We're not saying that there's no problem at the border, but Fox News and the MAGA are really exaggerating the problem down there at the border while they're trying to scuttle the efforts of the administration to deal with it. The Senate has a border bill ready, bipartisan border bill negotiated between Republicans and Democrats. An agreement would give the president the authority to completely shut down the border if daily crossing reach a certain level. And Biden said that he would be willing to do that. He would be willing to exercise that authority to completely shut down the border based on congressional quotas, congressional requirements for how many people are allowed to cross the border. It would also speed up the asylum process. So most of these people crossing are asylum seekers. The problem, again, I think we've talked about this, is that it takes so long to process asylum seekers. That basically they come into the country, they have nowhere to go while they're waiting to be processed. Sometimes it takes years, 5-7 years to process asylum seekers. Trump had the remain in Mexico policy where they weren't even allowed to cross. This Biden policy would speed up the asylum process so they could be processed more quickly, which would also speed up deportations of migrants who fail to qualify. So rather than just letting all these people chill at the border for years, we figure out which ones can come in and which ones have to go quickly. Anyway, that agreement is sitting in the Senate and won't be taken up by the House anytime soon because of Donald Trump. Cathy's trying to scuttle the border efforts. It's your fault, Cathy.
I know, obviously.
Donald Trump is trying to scuttle these efforts. He's not even really trying to hide the fact that he does not want a border solution to come through before he is president. He wants to be the president that solves the border crisis. He doesn't want to give Biden a win on the border. So House Republicans are scuttling this Senate deal. Troy Nell's coming out and saying it. Chuck Grassley coming out and saying, a few Republicans coming out and saying the quiet part out loud, that they don't want to give Biden a win on the border because they have nothing else to run on at this point. Let's be real. We're going to talk about the economy a little bit later, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Cathy, on Donald Trump? Basically, the House Republican caucus is just Trump's caucus, and they do whatever he wants them to do. And right now, they're not, even though repeatedly talking about how the border is their number one issue and what a crisis we have on the border. Apparently, it's an invasion that can wait till January of 2025 when they believe that Trump will be president again and he can deal with it. So.
Well, I just scribbled down a silly joke. Do you want my silly joke?
Yes.
I was like, Congress is the only caucus Trump has that works. Or works for him. It's fine. What do I think about all of this? Boy, do I have thoughts. I'm also stuck on a wire. I think the jig is up, right? And I think Republicans are figuring that up, that they've pushed the bullshit so long and made such a big deal about how Biden is failing and how we have to take back our country, that they're like, okay, fine, I'm going to go do that. And my favorite piece of this whole thing is that they got to the border invasion to find no border invasion, right? That lady who's the clip you showed, right? She gets down here and it's basically like, oh, we were lied to. Yeah, you were lied to. Oh, we get to the border. Oh, it's nowhere near as bad as they said. Like, is this the penny finally starting to drop? Are people going to be like, well, if that was a lie and that was a lie and then that happened and that like, is this finally the man behind the curtain? Is this Toto, pulling back the sheet? Are we finally seeing who the wizard is? And you, me, Democrats, a lot of people have known man behind the curtain, but I think they have milked this cow as long as they could. I think this gravy train is ending, and that's fun. The Biden's border thing, that has been the other favorite thing. Like, literally, who was it? Was it Chuck Grassley, I think you said, that went on television and literally said, we're not doing this, it'll make Biden look good?
Yeah,
and
he literally said that.
And I don't think he's the only one that's like alluded to it. Like, he says it straight up because he's 90 and he doesn't know how to filter anymore. But he's not like the only one kind of saying that, you know what I mean? And it's telling, if you will, right? Like, they 2 weeks ago, they were complaining that they don't have anything to run on, right? Then the thing that they run on the most, they could pass this. They're saying it'll make Biden look good, or you could use it for yourselves to say how you were able to force the president into signing a hard-line immigration bill and keep us in Congress, and we'll keep holding President Biden accountable, right? But they won't do that because they can't even give the opportunity for Biden to be able to say, I worked with Republicans to pass an immigration law, and while it's not everything I wanted, for the sake of the country. They have their own argument to make if this bill passes, but just because Biden will also have an opportunity, they're willing to literally burn the house down rather than put up some planks of it. And if whoever can't see through that at this point, because I've seen a lot of people who were like hardline Republicans who saw that and they're like, well, wait, that doesn't make sense. Oh, doesn't it? So these are 3 things in a row, all in the course of 1 week, blowing up in your face. That doesn't make sense. I know. It's almost like I haven't been lying to you all this time.
It's the politics of politics. It's not the politics of governance. It's the governing thing to do would be to address the fucking problem at the border but they're not willing to do that. And you know, give it to Trump. Trump understands optics probably better than a lot of people in politics, and he's
Probably the only thing he does
gotten
understand.
the Republican Party kind of on this train. The optics of come November, the entire fucking border has collapsed. There's billions of people crossing the border. Donald Trump gets elected, and the first thing he does day one is basically shut the border, and it start deportations and all this stuff. He can claim a victory that he solved the problem, and that's what they're going for. That's what they want. They don't want Biden to be able to have any win on the border on immigration. It's the only thing they can run on. Hence this like Texas National Guard bullshit that we talked about last episode.
Mm-hmm.
The economy is doing much better. The abortion stuff is not playing out for them at all. So
Fox
it's
News
all
the
they
other
got.
day, like admit it. Yeah, like I saw on Fox News like the other day. I can't remember who it was, but they literally were like, "There's no recession. I don't know what to do." They literally don't know what to do with themselves because all the things they said were supposed to happen with a Democratic president are not happening, and quite literally the opposite is happening. It's fun to watch the meltdown. I'm not gonna lie, but also.
It's funny because you have half of Fox that's like admitting it's like the January 6th thing. It's like, okay, was it a false flag operation by Antifa and that wasn't really Trump supporters? Or was it like not really as bad? It was a Trump supporters, but it's not really as bad as like everyone saying. It's like a fake insurrection. They can't figure out what it is. It's the same with the economy. Half the people are like, the economy is fucking terrible, blah, blah, blah. And those people sound ridiculous when you have the kind of numbers that we're getting in and consumer sentiments rising. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Well, it's the
but you have
same
half
thing
of Fox talking about how bad the economy is, and the other half of Fox being like having to admit that the economy's good, but it's probably because Donald Trump is like winning in the polls or whatever. So it's weird.
Yeah. But it's the same thing as when they say Biden is both senile and can't form a sentence, but is also a criminal mastermind pulling the strings of the global world to cause wars all over the place. Like, is he a senile fool or is he a criminal mastermind? He cannot possibly be both.
Mitt Romney weighed in. Outgoing Senator Mitt Romney from Utah weighed in, quote, "I think the border is a very important issue for Donald Trump. And the fact that he would communicate to Republican senators and congresspeople that he doesn't want us to solve the border problem because he wants to blame Biden for it is really appalling," end quote. So by Mitt Romney weighing in there, not a fan of Donald Trump. So yeah, interesting stuff. It's who knows if they're going to get that done at all, because the Republicans in Congress are completely just agents of Donald Trump at this point, which is really horrifying.
It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out over the next few months. Because
Gaza update. Oh boy. All right, let's unload a little bit here. Cathy, I know you've got some thoughts. So the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have reached Rafah, which is the bottom of Gaza on the Egyptian border. There's officially nowhere else for Palestinians to go. No word yet if this means that they're done, or like if Israel's done now because they've conquered the entire Gaza Strip, or whether they're just gonna keep killing Palestinians, keep their genocide going. Even though, I mean, there's no indication of how successful the campaign has been. They've said that they've killed I think the other day they said they'd killed a third of Hamas or something. They're pulling out some kind of numbers that no one can really verify. Biden pushing more and more loudly for a Palestinian state, moving towards, once again, a two-state solution. Biden also sanctioning Israeli settlers in the West Bank who attack Palestinians. There's been like close to 500 violent attacks on Palestinian civilians in the West Bank from Israeli settlers since October 7th. 8 people, including one child, have died. 8 Palestinians, including one Palestinian child, has died in these attacks. Hundreds wounded. They've included crop burning farm equipment, attacking Palestinian communities, inciting riots against Palestinian communities in the West Bank, which again is not part of Gaza Strip. It's the other sort of Palestinian territories. So it's just it's gotten really bad. But Biden moving to sanction Israeli settlers. The first round of sanctions was 4 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, sanctioned for their role in causing this violence. Basically, their U.S. assets are seized. They can't transfer any money, and they cannot go back into the United States. They can't. They're being denied entry into the United States. And the language of the sanctioning suggests that anyone in Israel who helps lead or organize these types of attacks on Palestinian civilians will face these sanctions, which leaves the door open to members of the Israeli government facing that kind of sanction as well. So that's interesting. So yeah, just a giant problem here. We are getting pulled back into wars in the Middle East, and I gotta say, it's like very, very unsettling to me, the fact that we're bombing Syria again and we're bombing the Houthis, and it's very hard to wrap my head around the fact that we were out of this, a couple of years ago, and now we're getting dragged back in because of our alliance with Israel. I think that it's officially time to reassess that alliance with Israel. It's basically Israel, the United States, and the United Kingdom that are the three countries here. The rest of the world is not behind this at all. And if it's you in the United Kingdom and that's it right now, is not a good. It's not a good
not a good look. Not a good look.
United Kingdom is in chaos. Their government is a disaster. Their economy is falling apart. They have a hard right government that's just has lost all credibility as well. So it's not good. Lost all credibility on the world stage. No one will join us. Cathy, what's your analysis of this for the policy around our involvement now in the Middle East? And I will say the attacks on Syria are in response to 3 service members being killed in a drone attack by Iranian proxies. So yes, we do want to defend our troops. We do want to defend our interests in the Middle East. But that's kind of the point, is like, why did those 3 troops have to die over Israel? They young kids, army reservists, getting killed in the Middle East. Probably more attacks on Americans coming, all just because of our historic need to protect Israel. These kids had nothing to do with Israel. We don't even know if they supported Israel. They just happened to be army reservists who are on a base in Jordan. A lot of innocent Americans are going to die, and frankly, that pisses me off too. The fact that we're now being drawn again because of our alliances in the Middle East into conflicts that the majority of Americans want nothing to do with. The majority of Americans want absolutely nothing to do with sending Americans to die in the Middle East. It's got nothing to do with us, and it's just it's fucking old. We're beyond exhausted at this point. I don't think we can take much more of this.
Yeah. What I'll say is I'm gonna Taylor Swift reference, if I will.
Oh boy.
I'm a little bit feeling 22 here, because that was the last time I felt this way about fuckery in the Middle East. That's when this all fucking started for us, you and me. And yeah. I like that we had about 15 minutes where there was a little bit less war and then right back to war, because that is kind of the cornerstone of our economy, sadly.
That's what we do.
Fine, though, whatever. Your point to the fact that it's us and the UK, an interesting one, and we should probably pay more attention to that piece than I think we are.
Yeah.
Because you say it's time that we reevaluate our alliance with Israel. Yeah, and perhaps we should rethink our alliance with the UK unless, and there's a big unless to this one, right? And they have general elections coming up this year. It's looking as though their general elections will put some reasonableness back in their government. Labour is looking to pick up huge victories. They're collectively in the UK pretty done with the Tories. Brexit has got Scottish independence back up on the buzz, but that's, never too far behind. Let's be real. The Scots and their independence. Gotta love them. But like you said, it was a far-right movement in the UK that pushed Brexit. A lot of people voting for it because they fell into kind of the fear-based xenophobic propaganda that kind of pushed it, which was happening at the same time as the Donald Trump 2016 thing, right? So Brexit was a little bit of a bellwether. When Brexit passed, I had this sinking feeling. It's like that was when I knew Donald Trump was probably going to win. Putting Hillary up was where I got my spidey senses started tingling because of the Clinton stench of NATO, or not NATO, NAFTA, sorry, for those swing states in that region that were kind of really, really hurt by NAFTA. But then Brexit kind of abandoning the European Union puts them in a position to try to establish themselves as a global power not tied to the EU. And I always found that really concerning. This is a little bit of a British tangent. I'm sorry about this, but you've got to remember that there's the psychology that comes in constitutional monarchs. It's a little bit different than constitutional republics like ours. We have democratic elections. We very much anticipate changes to leadership. It happens frequently. We're used to it. It is not frequent. They are not used to it in the UK. They go through prime ministers like Socks, see Liz Truss, right? But the prime minister isn't really their figurehead. They are, but they're not, right? Who is the head of the British government? Queen Elizabeth. Well, not Queen Elizabeth anymore, but it was Queen Elizabeth for a very long time. No matter who the prime minister was, the Queen was always there. And that's kind of why people love monarchs. Like Thomas Hobbes wrote about it, right? The reason we like monarchs is because there's a sense of security and stability to them. And it's an easy place to blame, right? Like England gets away with a lot of their past fuckery because they just be like, that monarchy's gone now. It's not us. We're the better monarchy. And it's fine. And it works somehow. But Charles coming to the throne and William and Kate coming of age with the young family, because Charles is 70. He's not going to be king for very long. And William is 40 and he will be king for very long. You know what I mean? And if they've left Europe, if they're wanting to reestablish themselves as a powerhouse, a king of England has a vibe to it in global politics that we have forgotten a little bit because of the Queen for so long. Global politics is super fucking sexist, and the Queen of England is significantly less scary to, say, the Saudi monarch than the King of England. And if the King of England is connected to an EU alliance and held hostage by the EU Parliament, then the King of England is neutered. But if England is not part of the European Union, if the Great Britain stands alone with a new king, that's a different vibe. And I don't think that's getting the energy it needs. So if it's the United States and our empire, which is basically the remnants of the British Empire, and the new budding King of England trying to rebuild his empire, as Putin is trying to rebuild his empire by taking the Central European continent. This isn't the team we want to be on. We don't want to be one of like the three bad guys that the rest of the world is fighting. That's not, it's well, I think bad.
I think we've been the bad guy for a while now, but we still had that, modicum of respect. I mean, when we went into Iraq in 2003, we had the Coalition of the Willing, which was, I don't know, fucking 47 countries or some shit. Not everybody,
think, but some same point.
Not everybody did as much as we did, or the UK. But this time we got nobody. Everybody, the entire fucking world is against us on this one. It's not, European leaders are talking about boycotting trips to Washington D.C. over this. Like we're really out on a ledge here on our own, and it's not looking good. I do think that I will come back to this. I do think Biden is the right president for this moment. Certainly much more than Trump, because Biden will start moving towards a Palestinian state. Biden will push the Israelis to ramp down. You at least want a U.S. president that will be, a bug in the ear of Netanyahu to stop what he's doing. And ultimately, hopefully, Biden will drop his support for Netanyahu. If we have to, I think we need to drop our support for Israel, at least for this government, not for the Israeli people, but for this government. If this is the track that they're going to continue to go on, if they're going to continue to prove themselves to be bad, they've officially become a bad actor on the world stage, and it's weird to say that. But we cannot be putting our national security at risk to be defending more bad actors who are just engaging in genocide. I don't care about the political lobby. I don't care about the historical significance of Israel. It's enough is enough. They've got to stop killing civilians, like point blank. And if they cannot do that, they've got to stop killing civilians. They've got to work towards building a two-state solution with a democratically elected Palestinian government that can support the Palestinian right to self-determination in that region. They've officially lost credibility for their state, to be honest with you, but they've officially lost any credibility they had working against the Palestinian state. News came out that they were propping up Hamas for the last decade because Hamas was driving a wedge between Gaza and the West Bank, between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. They had this like loose alliances. Hamas and Israel need each other in a way. Hamas needs Israel so that they have an enemy. Israel needs Hamas, so they've got to get rid of Hamas. They need a democratically elected, secure government for the Palestinians, and they need a democratic, government for the Israelis as well. And that doesn't include someone like Benjamin Netanyahu.
It doesn't, right? And I've said this a bunch of times, like to the people screaming "Free Palestine," you have to understand that can't happen with Benjamin Netanyahu in power, nor can it happen with Hamas in power, right? They're both bad actors here, but our support of Bibi is diminishing returns at this point, to use an economics term, because I'm teaching that right now. And it goes to the generational politics that I talk about all of the time, right? And my obsession with the Cold War and the travesty that it's not taught properly, because parts of the Cold War are taught as kind of standalone things. The Vietnam War is taught as the Vietnam War, not as a proxy for the Cold War. The Korean War is the Korean War, not as a proxy for the Cold War. The Middle Eastern conflict is not even taught at all. The fall of the Cold War is just very much we were stronger, they collapsed. The complexity of the Cold War is not taught to Americans. They do not understand it, which means they don't understand the political impact of it ending either. So when the Cold War ended, that created an end to a collective purpose. And part of that collective purpose included this unquestionable allegiance to the nation of Israel, because it was created for the purpose of defending America's role in the Cold War, which Britain was directly tied to as well. We were allied in our fight against Soviet communism, and Israel existed as our little chess piece in the region, and we amped up the state, we supported them intentionally, we did all of these things, and therefore no questioning this relationship, because if we question the relationship, then they're going to start asking questions about it, and we don't want that. So boomers, Gen X, unquestioning support for Israel, which was amped up even more after 9/11, because now they're our democratic ally in the region, and the big scary Muslims and Arabs. You remember the rhetoric. You were there. Those of you out there, you were there. You remember how gross it was, right? So you've got those older voters unquestioningly supporting Israel, and then you've got millennials and Gen Z with very much but why though? Why don't we question Israel? They have no idea what that contextual, like, collective national purpose was in the Cold War. They have only grown up in post-Cold War. They saw the resources used during the Cold War invested in the 1990s to build a booming economy, the internet, like this whole big thing. And that immediately went away after the attacks of 9/11. It was sort of like a gear shift back toward Cold War era military spending and fuckery. And we paid the price for it, because the domestic investment of the 1990s going away back to a war machine ultimately led to a deregulated economy that collapsed. We saw that. We paid the price for that. So millennials, Gen Z, only know a world where fighting wars internationally breaks the world. My childhood is marred by economic recession and political conflict because of wars in the Middle East. We grew up knowing nothing but wars in the Middle East. We had the Gulf War when we were little kids. We had Afghanistan and Iraq in our like teens and 20s. It's all we've ever known. Us hearing about bombings in the Middle East, it can a little bit get lost in my brain, same as you, because it was fucking every day my entire life that these kind of things were happening. But people younger than us don't remember those things, and they have absolutely no understanding how and why we could support this when they're seeing what's happening on television. They see a genocidal imperial bull fucking shit asshole basically like, yeah, I'm gonna take the territory that wasn't even involved in the attack, go on to the West Bank, take it, like screaming from the hills, he's gonna just abolish the Palestinian state, I want all of the land. That is genocidal, that is imperialistic, and why we are supporting that is getting less and less popular, and the people you're relying on the most to vote for you are the ones questioning it the most, which means it's time that we question it. So the fact that all of our political leaders are 1,000 years old plays into it too. Because if all of your elected leaders are silent gen boomers and Xers who have been told never to question their support for Israel, their political votes, their political actions, the moves they make in government will reflect those values. The fact that there are only like a handful of millennials and Gen Z, they're the ones questioning the policies, and that's a generational shift happening in politics. And Biden has been very aware of this generational shift happening in domestic politics, but I don't think he's caught on to the shift on how it's playing into the foreign stage.
Agreed,
Because he's also been able to live in a world where Americans don't vote on foreign policy, right? They vote on domestic policy. And he, having been working in foreign policy for so long, has been able to campaign on domestic policy and not have to talk about foreign policy because voters don't care about foreign policy. But here's a clue, Joey. Young voters do care about foreign policy because young voters grew up on the internet. Like, young voters grew up in a world where they always knew what was happening in Germany. They always knew what was happening around the world. They could always get on the computer and see what's happening in other part of the world. Like, this might seem random, but like, these kids love anime, and anime is art that comes from Japan, which means that they are very much like searching Asian art and culture, which is putting them on a global stage. If you're on a global stage, you're more aware of global events. These kids are really tuned into those things because they can be. We didn't have the internet like they did, so they get to go on rabbit holes and learn about things that we were in college before we learned about. So they do have a very global perspective, and I honestly think sometimes it's why the right wing is so, like, all of a sudden anti-globalization, because they realize that global exposure to culture has created a very tolerant youth population, and tolerance doesn't help fascist movements be successful. So I don't think they're globalists or anti-globalists because of like the economics. I think they're anti-globalists because it's really putting a sword in the thigh of their evangelical culture wars.
Mm-hmm.
That's my official position.
Yeah, well,
that was a long rant. I'm sorry. That was a really
long
good.
It was good. We managed to cover generational politics and Britishness, so that's right up Cathy's alley there. That's good.
Isn't it weird how I can do these like Jeremy Bearmys of historical context and I'll bring it back together? Jeremy Bearmys, a shout out to my Good Place fans out there, if there are any.
I think Biden's legacy is gonna be tarnished by this 100%, unless he can figure out a way to solve this conflict. He's still got time to get this thing sorted out, to make sure that that Israel stops this nonsense.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, his campaign is literally only just
he's just kind of starting to move in that direction. I think he needs to move a little bit faster. But to be clear, what you're going to get from Biden is a lot better than what you're going to get from Trump. If it's Trump, it's 100%, Muslim bans and wiping Palestine off the planet and recognizing Jerusalem and more Israeli settlers, more settlements, Russia, more pro-Russia stuff. So it's completely the opposite of a administration with any sort of moral conscience in the Middle East is not what you're going to get with Trump. So it's February. He's got he's got a few months to get this squared away. Biden's got to start moving in that direction, though. We got to see some leadership on the world stage. Besides, and that was such a great point. I think Biden's living in the foreign policy of like 2 decades ago, where he thinks he thinks big moves on the world stage is the way to go. That'll command respect. And I think the world has just moved on. They've moved on from American leadership. They don't care anymore. But Biden has 50 years of foreign policy experience. Biden is the foreign policy guy. So if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be Biden that'll understand this. What's going on? You got to remember,
Trump would probably get on television and be like, I support Bibi using nukes to get rid of Hamas. He wouldn't think twice. He wouldn't blink about it. And Bibi wouldn't think about doing it, I think, truthfully. I mean, it's small territory, so there's something to be said there. But I mean, if he was given the option to use mass destructive weapons, he'd use them. And to your point, the campaign's just kicking off. He's starting to kind of walk in that direction. Hopefully the campaign will be where and how he starts steering this policy. And it would be good to do it because he'd be able to show that he's literally steering his campaign in the direction of what his voters are telling him on the trail. And that will go over well with people. So even if he's not able to do what they want, being listened to goes a long way in politics,
Yeah. We'll see. So, there's got to be some different leadership in a different direction on the world stage there. I've been hesitant to say this because it sounds kind of callous because so many Palestinians have died already anyway. But I really believe that kind of Joe Biden is the only reason why Netanyahu hasn't just gone in and fucking killed every man, woman, and child in Gaza. And I think Trump,
without question,
I think Trump would give him a pass to do that. I think Biden's bug in Netanyahu's ear is the only reason why he's shown any restraint whatsoever, which again hasn't amounted to much. But
I know, like, to say that people get mad. Like, I've said that to people and they've gotten mad. Like, they'll yell at me in my comments. They're like, "This is restraint." I'm like, sadly, yes. Like,
for
sadly,
Netanyahu, yeah,
like,
it is.
I know it doesn't appear to a reasonable human that doesn't have genocidal aspirations like you and I that this doesn't seem restrained. But what Bibi wants to do versus what Bibi has done are very different things.
There's a whole ass West Bank and East Jerusalem there. It's not just Gaza. There's a lot of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank that Netanyahu would love to move out of there. So,
and I
you
guarantee
see it with these settler attacks. You see it with these indiscriminate attacks on Palestinian civilians in the West Bank
and
by Israeli settlers.
And some painful truths that I think needs to be, and I'm preparing for some mean probably reviews on our podcast here, but like, painful truths is that the criticism of Biden's handling of this is making it easier for Bibi to kill people, because Biden's ability to sway Bibi's behavior is dependent on his political capital. And if people are going after him, especially his own party, especially young progressives, if we're not voting for him, if his approval ratings are in the toilet, Bibi can use that as a, why should I listen to you? You're probably not even going to be here next year. I'm going to ignore all the suggestions you have. I'm going to steamroll in because I know the next guy will let me do it. Why does he know that? Because Bibi worked with Trump. Trump was president. He knows that. So the more critical we are of Biden, the more angry you get with him about his handling of this, the less power he has to do what you want him to do. That's the thing. Politics is about optics. And if it looks like Biden is like out for the count, that nobody's supporting him, that his own party has turned on him, nobody on the national stage will do anything with him, because you're making him an international lame duck if you make it seem as though he's not getting reelected. And then if everybody on the international stage knows who his replacement will be, that's going to be bad news, because they will have a year to prepare for what a Trump presidency will mean for them. And go look into what the world leaders actually think about Donald Trump. Go look at how they're preparing themselves already for an inevitable Trump presidency. If Donald Trump gets elected, I guarantee NATO will take a vote to kick us out. Will the vote pass? I don't know, but somebody will call for it,
Yeah. Well, Trump will welcome that.
Just last thing on this, an ally,
last thing on this which, by the way, Biden we're getting into South Carolina, and Biden just won with 96% of the vote. So it's not like the Democratic Party has any appetite, at least the South Carolina flavor of the Democratic Party has any appetite of moving away from Biden. But you're 100% right, Cathy, is that Netanyahu is just sitting there biding his time because he thinks Trump may be coming back. And Netanyahu's waiting for Trump to come back, and you better believe that Trump is the candidate, the president that Bibi Netanyahu wants. He's just praying that Trump comes back into office, so he's just kind of biding his time on that. All right, well, let's talk about a little bit of some electoral politics here. We're going to get into South Carolina. But I see that we have our guest has just jumped on in the waiting room. Monique Worrell is here. I'm so excited to talk to her, Cathy. Her story is incredible, just really on the front lines of the DeSantis fuckery down there in Florida. Let's bring her on. We're going to talk a little bit of South Carolina, but then we're going to get into her story and how she really ran headlong into the DeSantis regime down there in Florida, and how she's fighting back. All right, joining us now on the program is our very special guest for today, Monique Worrell. We're super excited to have Monique on here with us. We haven't had a guest in a while, so this is exciting. It's cool to get back into the guest bandwagon. This is a really cool person to have on. Cathy, do you want to intro her a little bit, or you talked about her at the top of the show? So
I did.
Monique, do you want to just kind of briefly introduce yourself and what you do and what you're all about, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thank you for having me. This is really cool. Love to have the opportunity to do the personal relations that go along with podcasts. I'm Monique Worrell. I'm the elected state attorney for Orange and Osceola counties. I was elected in 2020 by 67% of the vote. That's going to become very important later in our discussion. I am currently in a suspended status as state attorney, thanks to our great authoritarian governor here in the state of Florida. But I am running for reelection in 2024. And again, I'm really happy to be here and get into some of these really important discussions about why it's so important for us to protect our democracy at all costs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I'm super excited to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on. And we do want to have a little bit of a Ron DeSantis discussion. Absolutely, coming up. Ron DeSantis dropping out of the presidential race. Let's touch a little bit of
fun of Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's also great for the country. Congratulations, America, because you dodged a huge bullet.
Yeah, it's a huge moment for American democracy.
Yeah.
Let's hit South Carolina real quick, and then we'll get into Monique's background and stuff. So about last night, Biden won South Carolina primary. Now, South Carolina is now the first official primary on the Democratic Party schedule. It used to be New Hampshire. We talked about that last time, that New Hampshire held a primary anyway, because it's in their constitution that they have to be the first primary in the nation. Biden won that primary, even though he wasn't on the ballot. He won by about 30 points in a write-in campaign against his opponent, Dean Phillips. So still cleaning up in New Hampshire, even though he wasn't on the ballot. He won with a write-in campaign. Last night, Saturday night, South Carolina primary, Biden wins 96%. He was on the ballot there. He got about 108,000 votes to Marianne Williamson's a little over 2,000 votes. Dean Phillips drops to third, about 1,800 votes. Biden now is at about 55 delegates. So, incumbent president, not a surprise. But still, with all the talk of the Democratic Party abandoning Biden, and there's this big split coming in the Democratic Party, and Democrats aren't happy with Joe Biden. It's interesting to see him winning at 96% in South Carolina. So
can I just say, Dean Phillips needs to go away because he lost to Marianne Williamson, and that's embarrassing.
Yeah. I don't know. Marianne Williamson is kind of a trip. I don't know. I thought Marianne would maybe turn it out here a little bit more in South Carolina. I thought it'd be a little bit closer than that. No, but it's interesting. It's interesting that Biden did so well there.
So Monique, I think a lot of the narrative around, there being a lack of support for Biden is intended to divide the Democratic Party, right? So I hate to quote Donald Trump, but it is fake news in the sense that, they're projecting and they want Democrats to feel like they're divided. But if you are within the Democratic Party, I think it's clear to us that Biden is going to be the presumptive nominee, right? And he is going to overwhelmingly receive the Democratic nomination. But in order to weaken him in the general, it's necessary to be able to spread that narrative about, him not being supported within the party.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct, because you see people questioning like his cognitive ability, his mental decline, only on the news though, because that's literally the only thing that they've got to go on. They can't really criticize his economy. They can't criticize anything else. So they have to try and point to all this bull crap like, oh, well, the Democrats don't even support him. And like, he won write-in New Hampshire. What was it, Troy? Like, they had to go out of their way to write his name in there, and still huge numbers. So I think you're exactly right. And Democrats need to get better at countering that. We have always been bad at messaging and counter messaging against Republican stupidity,
Let me play this.
So I think it's really important, though, about the news and the media and the role that they play in all of this. And I, 100%. Unfortunately, have had the opportunity to become acutely aware to how damaging the media can be when they latch on to a perspective on something, irrespective of the truth of the matter. They're going to go forward and they're going to push that narrative. And it can be really harmful to facts and to reality.
Yeah. 100%. By knowing a lot to South Carolina, it was sort of South Carolina in 2020 that really legitimized Biden's campaign among Black voters in the South, really sort of the core constituency of the Democratic Party. I think Biden was South Carolina was the third primary, and at that point, Biden was in like fifth place or something like that. But turning out a win in South Carolina, huge for Biden in 2020, big vote there last night, really shaking up the primary calendar, putting South Carolina first, really putting that core constituency of Black voters in the Democratic Party up front rather than going to New Hampshire first, which I think was a great move. But let's talk about your story, Monique. You just touched on the media and how they spin things and how they're working with the narrative. So tell us what happened. So you kind of had you won. What'd you say? You won by 67%. Is that right? That's awesome.
So I thank you. I launched a campaign in 2020 based on criminal justice reform. And what's really important about that is because it's kind of become demonized by the right over the past 5 years or so. But I want to be clear, criminal justice reform means addressing the fact that in this country, we have a problem with mass incarceration. We incarcerate more people than anywhere in the world. And here in the state of Florida, we do it at a rate even higher than the national average. So criminal justice reform means looking at that and seeing what changes can we make, right? Because mass incarceration hasn't made us safer. All it's done is, made people who profit off of prisons rich and disenfranchised minority communities by separating families for people who are not violent or a danger to our communities in every way. And people who are interested in criminal justice reform are looking at ways that we can use evidence-based practices to make our communities safer. And that's what my campaign was based on. I was a law professor for 17 years, a criminal defense attorney for 20 years before running. And I, in my practice, as well as in my profession as a law professor, we use this thing called research and data. It's something that's, kind of nefarious to,
crazy lady
ideology. I know, imagine that, right? So research and data and what it shows us about the way we've always done things, the failed war on drugs, right? The fact that marijuana is now legal in most places around the country, but you still have people in prison right now today serving life sentences based on their marijuana offenses, right? So looking at those practices, seeing what changes can we make in our system to acknowledge, one, the issue of mass incarceration, disproportionate minority representation, and the fact that we are criminalizing children in our system. And how can we as state attorneys serve as a service to the community and implement programming that will reduce crime and also reduce incarceration, which I'm really proud to say I was able to get a good start at accomplishing over the 2.5 years that I was in office. Crime was the lowest that it's been in the last decade. And I also reduced incarceration. Now, in the governor's executive order suspending me, he didn't talk about how I reduced crime. He only talked about how I reduced incarceration.
He did talk about how you reduce crime. He just took credit for it. Remember, we have the lowest crime rates in the country, blah, blah, blah. He didn't say how he got them. Notice. It's fine.
Right.
Yeah. Well, wow, that's surprising too, taking credit for somebody else's. Yeah. Well,
but
that's
no,
amazing.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I actually voted for you because, you're my lady. But that was actually what did it, because anyone who knows me and anyone familiar with the show knows my passionate, fiery hatred for Ronald Reagan and his war on drugs and how his administration really flipped the criminal justice to focus on mass incarceration, mandatory minimums, his war on drugs amped up and directly targeted Black communities blatantly and obnoxiously and right on display, and nobody seemed to do anything about him. And he was idolized by Republicans for that. And it has always made me crazy. So when your little pamphlet showed up on my door, I was like, hell yeah, that's my girl. And when I saw you got removed from office, I was ready to set things on fire. I'm not even going to lie. I was going to set things on fire. I didn't.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, just really outrageous and an outrageous attack on democracy for another elected official to come in and take away the vote of 297,000 Central Floridians. That's how many people cast their vote for me in November of 2020. 297,000.
Well, it'll be more in 2024, won't it? So
yet another example of Ron DeSantis' utter contempt for for the democratic process and democracy. But your success rate is incredible. How did you find out about? So tell us about being the DeSantis removal. DeSantis removing you from office.
Yeah.
His justification, what was it? You were too woke or something? What? Tell us what happened about this.
Yeah, so he removed me in his executive order stating that I came in last in the race of incarceration. So among the 20 jurisdictions that I had the lowest incarceration rate. I don't even know if that's really true, but if it is, it's important to understand that as a prosecutor, as an attorney, I took an ethical duty to do justice. The American Bar Association has standards for prosecutors, and nowhere in those standards is that we're supposed to maximize incarceration rates. So
exactly.
The fact that I reduced incarceration and also reduced crime in my jurisdiction should be something to be applauded, not something to be suspended for. So what he did is that he used the section of the Florida Constitution that gives the governor the ability to remove an elected official for neglect of duty, dereliction of duty, or incompetence. And what he did, in the same way that he gerrymandered tried to gerrymander judicial districts, but gerrymandered congressional districts, he gerrymandered the provisions of the constitutions and made them very vague. So my lawsuit against DeSantis was basically based in the fact that he didn't allege any specific criteria that I did that caused my leadership to be incompetent or derelict in my duties or neglectful of my duties. He said things like, I encouraged people to not seek minimum mandatories. I encouraged people to give withholds of adjudication. I encouraged people to not prosecute children as adults, without specifying how any encouragement that there may have been from my administration was in violation of my ethical responsibilities as the elected state attorney. In addition to, without providing any specific case. See, that's the thing about the law, right? If I did something, then you should be able to point to a specific example of what case I did it in and what the outcome was. But the executive order didn't point to any specific cases. In fact, not one specific example of case number 21, 22, or 23, where I did X and it resulted in Y, right? But instead, he used very vague assertions and accusations that were built on, hold your seats on this, false allegations made by the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, by the Osceola County Sheriff, who was under investigation by my administration for criminal activity.
Knock me over with a feather. You mean the guy that you were trying to put in jail for being a criminal got you kicked out of your job by a criminal?
So you were investigating this guy for corruption or misusing his office or something like that?
Right. So just to give you a little backstory. So the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, under the leadership of Sheriff Marcos Lopez, had one of the most corrupt organizations in law enforcement over my tenure as state attorney. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and look at all of the reporting around it. But he, his agency was responsible for the murder of a kid who stole some Pokemon cards and pizza. And, a lot of times when you criticize that, people will say, well, you shouldn't steal Pokemon cards and pizza. And I agree wholeheartedly. You shouldn't steal Pokemon cards and pizza. But the punishment for stealing Pokemon cards and pizza is not death.
Death sentence.
I think.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think we all should be able to agree on that, right?
I would hope
so that was one of the cases that was being investigated by my office. But in the investigation of that case, it came to my office's knowledge that there were multiple instances of false reports being filed by the Osceola County Sheriff's offices. And Osceola County Sheriff's deputies were notarizing police reports that weren't signed by the individuals who signed them.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So we were investigating this, and amidst my investigation of this, the Osceola County Sheriff came out with this very unrelated sneak attack that the media was all over about how I'm not prosecuting any drug offenses and I'm not prosecuting any trafficking offenses. And he gave this whole press conference where he gave media about all these cases that he presented to my office for prosecution, and that we prosecuted 0 was the big thing that he did, right? And in doing so, he did it as a sneak attack. He did it at 4 o'clock on a Thursday evening, which means that it took my team all weekend to be able to actually pull the cases, find out the information, and develop a response, to which we held a responding press conference on Monday. But by then the media cycle had died down on it.
Moved on.
And they weren't really concerned about the fact that of the 7 cases that he used as examples, they were actually responsible for why the majority of them were not prosecuted. And when I say they were responsible, I mean they arrested the wrong person. They charged someone with trafficking who didn't actually have an illegal substance in their possession. These were the types of things. They presented a case for trafficking where the amount of drugs that the person was arrested for weren't verified by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement as being a trafficking amount of drugs. So this is the kind of, corruption and incompetence and neglect of duty that I was dealing with as state attorney, but I was the one who was removed for neglect of duty for not prosecuting trafficking cases where there was no actual evidence of drug trafficking.
So it's crooked cops. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
It's crooked cops. Kids are getting killed. They're falsely notarizing signatures. They're setting people up. You investigate that, and they come after you for not investigating these fake trafficking allegations. I wrote in the chat because it reminded me of all this. They're talking about it reminds me of what they talk about like in New York, like Soros bought out like Soros DAs or whatever in New York City that aren't prosecuting crime correctly. But yeah, it's just that's horrifying. That's absolutely horrifying.
So I've been accused of the very same thing, right? They also use Soros. In fact, if you look
how much money did you get from Soros, Monique?
Yeah, seriously.
So funny story. I do not know George Soros, never met him. And there is an organization that is funded by George Soros that in the last 10 days of my election, you mentioned, Cathy, that you saw a flyer in your mailbox. It's very likely that I didn't send that flyer. In the last 10 days of my elections, I started getting flyers in my mailbox with my face on it, talking about all of the things that we discussed at the beginning about mass incarceration, about ending the school to prison pipeline, about things that make sense and are important, but not things that I sent out. So this whole Soros boogeyman trope is something that has been used to devalue the work of people who believe in reducing mass incarceration in this country. So Soros funding is not something that you go and apply for. It is something that shows up out of nowhere when you start talking about the things that matter and make sense, like keeping kids out of prison and keeping minority families together and only incapacitating those individuals who actually show a present danger to our community.
It's so funny to me because it's like the people who gave us Citizens United are completely unaware of the outcomes that it causes. Like these political organizations can exist with money that we can't trace and can support whomever they choose with or without the knowledge of that candidate. Like this was y'all's idea. Right? And now you're mad that it's working against you. Like, I'm sorry you didn't think that Democrats also had rich friends. It blows my mind.
It's exactly right.
Ugh,
It's exactly right.
That's great. The way they spin these things is unbelievable. So what was the aftermath?
It's almost impressive, truthfully, but
well, yeah. What was the aftermath then? Okay, so DeSantis removes you. How'd you find out? And then what was sort of the aftermath for your office in that situation?
Yeah. So one of the things that people often ask me is, did you have any notice? Did you know it was coming? And what I have to say to that is, I did know it was coming. I knew it was coming right after I got elected. So Ryan Williams was one of my opponents in the Democratic primary in 2020. And after I won the primary and I was, going through the process of winning the general election, I met with Ryan Williams. He asked to meet with me because he wanted to pitch himself as someone who could be my chief assistant prosecutor in my administration. I ultimately didn't go with him, but in that meeting, he said to me, "You need to know that the governor is seeking to have you removed." Now, it's important for people to understand that this happened before I ever took office, before I ever raised my hand.
That would be
and
crucial
took
information.
right? I was told by someone who ironically is now in the office and responsible for running the office that the governor was seeking to have me removed. All right. So I heard what he said. I moved forward accordingly. I took office in January of 2021. And in August of 2021, Andrew Warren, the prosecutor in Hillsborough County, was removed on August 4th of 2021. Now, on that day, I thought that I would be removed, right? And my team and I, we got together and we started, trying to strategize around the fact that I would be removed. I was not removed on that day. It would be an entire year later until I was removed. And what the governor and his administration did for that year was play with me in the way that a snake plays with a mouse that it's about to eat in a cage, right? In February, we had the Pine Hills shooting. It was a terrible tragedy, right? There were several people shot, 3 lives were lost.
Yeah.
They immediately pounced on me in an effort to make that shooting my fault. They did so. The sheriff, John Mina, immediately came out and gave a statement to the media, which the media jumped all over, about how this individual had been arrested 19 times and had 0 convictions. And that is a narrative that you would often hear law enforcement give under my administration. Pay attention to the media now, because you don't hear anything like that happening anymore since I've not been in office. But under my administration, you'd often hear the media give stories about how many arrests someone had in comparison to how many convictions they had. Now, what was important to understand about the individual who perpetrated this shooting was, 1, he was 19 years old. 2, any arrest that he had would never have been considered convictions because they were juvenile. They were not adults. And we don't refer in the criminal justice system, not Monique Worrell, but in the criminal justice system, we do not refer to arrests of juveniles as convictions. Their dispositions are called adjudications. So it was very dishonest for the sheriff to come out and say this individual had 19 arrests and 0 convictions. But he knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't care about being honest. He wanted to paint a narrative that by me sitting in office, I caused this individual to perpetrate this mass shooting on the community. Furthermore, of the arrests that the individual had, only one of them happened under my administration. And you want to know what that one was for? Possession of marijuana.
I was my guess.
Possession of marijuana. So only one arrest happened under my administration. It was for possession of marijuana. And after I came out and clarified that, number 1, it was a juvenile history. Number 2, it happened not under my administration. They honed in on the fact, well, in this one possession of marijuana case, you could have put him in prison forever and stopped him from committing this mass murder. Now, the reason that is so, the reason it's so offensive is that out of the 20 judicial circuits, all 20 agree that no one would have sent that kid to prison for possession of marijuana.
Especially not for the rest of his life.
Furthermore, at that point in time, we weren't even prosecuting across the state. We weren't prosecuting possession of marijuana cases because the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was not testing substances that weighed less than 50 grams. And his case was for less than 20 grams of marijuana. All right. But the kicker in that case was that during that arrest for marijuana, there was a firearm in the car. And that firearm in the car was never charged by the Orange County Sheriff's Office. They never brought charges against anyone in that vehicle for possession of a firearm. And had they investigated the possession of the firearm in the way that they should have, that could have been a charge that would have kept him in jail during the time span where the shooting happened. But they did not do that. And when evidence of this came out, the media dropped it. They didn't cover it at all. They didn't talk about it at all. Meanwhile, Senator Rick Scott from Washington, D.C. was calling for my removal. DeSantis's office was sending interrogation requests to my administration, asking how all of the cases in my administration were being resolved, how many cases had been dropped, how many cases had been downgraded. We were in one of the largest financial crises as far as employment was concerned, because we were facing the Great Resignation. So I had employees who were leaving to go to private practice hand over fist. And they wanted me to stop the work of prosecuting cases to provide them a detailed analysis on the cases that were being brought. And it didn't stop there, because then the law enforcement agencies started with public records requests regarding the disposition of cases. And this went on and on and on for months. One agency after another. There was a local political operative who was trying to get information through one of my employees regarding the amount of human trafficking cases that had been dropped under my administration. She was advised by the DeSantis administration for a meeting that she had that following Monday with the DeSantis administration. And 2 weeks before my removal, a friend and a colleague called and said, I heard it's going to happen this Wednesday. And it didn't happen that Wednesday, but sure enough, the following Wednesday, I was driving in for what was going to be a media relations day. I was heading over to Channel 9 to explain to them why it was important for them to report on facts and not on conjecture, to explain to them how the criminal process works and why when they report that the sheriff's office gave us a case and we didn't do anything about it, it's also important for them to report on what evidence the sheriff's office may have neglected to provide that precluded us from moving forward in the case. And I received a call from my chief investigator reading me the executive advising advising of my removal from the office of state attorney and admonishing me not to come in and to begin to prepare my items to be returned to the state.
Wow. That's crazy.
I've been like writing notes down as you've been saying it, because there's so many things I want to jump on here, right? Like, they're mad at you because you treat minors like minors, right? That you recognize that children are children and should be tried as children and not as adults, because Florida loves trying minors as adults, right? Like, I don't know the numbers, you probably do, but I'm pretty sure we're like top in the country for states that do that. And
so much so that the legislature changed the law in 2018 to make charging children as adults discretionary instead of mandatory.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And even though they changed the law on this, that was still a reason given in my executive order that I exercised my discretion to not charge children as adults, and I shouldn't have done that.
It makes me crazy. And also, like, the other thing I wrote down is that they want you to prosecute minor offenses for potential consequences of future crimes they anticipate people committing based on how they perceive those people. And I think we can all guess how they're perceiving people, right? I'm going to go ahead and guess every case they're mad at you for not prosecuting had a very common variable in them. Is that safe to say?
Well, the reality is this. Other than the criminal Osceola Sheriff's Office, who, outlined this list of drug cases that I failed to prosecute, there were no specific cases mentioned that I didn't prosecute. So while I agree with you that the perception of who the people are that I'm not prosecuting is probably clear, and we got to be careful because they're working on a bill now that if you call someone racist, that you can be sued, whether or not they're racist. Something completely different, right? But there were no specific cases mentioned. So I can't even go with you on that because I don't have any specific cases to say, in this case, this is what happened. And in that case, that was what happened, because the executive order was so vague. It didn't cite any specific cases.
Ooh.
Right.
You know how, this is what I think people forget about Ron DeSantis that I love every opportunity to point out. Like, he cut his political teeth defending torture at Gitmo, right? And that's why he can do this. He's so good at finding the vague language because he literally came to his position today as figuring out how to take the language of the Constitution to justify waterboarding. Like, that's why he can do it. That's why he's so good at this. And I wish, like you said, media doesn't pay any attention to that. That's I think a very critical characteristic of his political persona that gets crickets. I can't tell you how many people don't even know that about him. And I'm like, he's your governor and he's been defending torture for 20 years.
Right.
Well, I don't live in Florida, so I can just come out and say it. I think it was racism. I think they went after you. I think they had it out for you from the very beginning. They were trying to defend these racist cops. Cathy wrote it was like the Wisconsin where they were trying to impeach her before she was even the justice that they were trying to impeach her before she was even in. So yeah, I think it was just kind of a no-win scenario. They were coming after you from day one to kind of enforce DeSantis's vision of Florida and his sort of racist crusade there in Florida. It's just what a mess. What an absolute mess that is.
And to be clear, this had less to do with the facts of the matter than it did with DeSantis's, fallen presidential campaign. Right. This was an effort for him to push himself to the forefront as a, law and order expert. And he, continuously used me and Andrew Warren as political talking points on the campaign trail. My suspension came within days of his first Republican presidential debate, where he proudly took the stage and bragged about how he removed two, Soros prosecutors from his state.
So it's just
how
political.
Did it feel like hearing him mention you at every debate? I don't know. Did you watch the?
It was infuriating.
Painful, but yeah, I bet
it was infuriating. It was infuriating because, he changed the law to allow himself to be able to run for president while also being governor. And if you look at the law,
I forgot about
that kept him from doing that. It's rooted in the fact that if you are running for president, you can't possibly be focused on what's best for the people of the state of Florida. Exactly. You're going to be focused on political gamesmanship. And this is exactly what we saw play out here.
Exactly.
He completely neglected the will of the voters of the state of Florida so that he could gain political points on a national debate stage. And the American people, thank God, were smart enough and they rejected that. Even the Republicans.
Started to move his
irony of
family to Iowa. Hasn't been in Florida.
Yeah, but the twisted irony of that to me is that he cited dereliction of duty, you're not doing your job, so you have to be removed from office, while he literally did that. He spent all of this time in Iowa, traveling all around. Where were you? Where were you doing your job? Can you remove yourself from your office for failing to do your job? Because that would be cool. I'd love to see that.
Right.
Well, thankfully, DeSantis has the charisma of a lima bean, so he didn't and I think we all sort of figured that out outside of Florida. What you guys have known for a while is that DeSantis sucks, but we were all sort of really afraid about the prospects of a DeSantis presidency for a while. Should we move into Cathy? Should we move into Monique's payback for the subscribers on Patreon? Should we move into that section now? What do you think about that?
So I think that's a good idea because I'm dying to make fun of Ron DeSantis, and I know we can't be super public about that. So this is the paid subscription part where we can speak freely about the governor because he has to give me money to hear it.
So we're gonna move on to that part of the recording now with Monique Worrell. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Is there anything else you want to say before?
We're gonna leave our non-paid subscribers here. Anything else that you want to say for the general audience, buddy?
Look for me in 2024. I'm going to be on the ballot in Florida. And even if you're not in Florida, you should take great interest because I am now a candidate who represents democracy.
Awesome.
Love that.
Awesome.
Love that. And we can have you back on when the election gets closer so you can start talking about some of your the details of your race. Pitch local people around. We'll get them on the show. Gotta save democracy,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Front line of democracy right here. It's so cool to talk to. So we're going to leave the non-subscribers or our listeners here. Thank you all so much. We love you guys. Check out the video of the show on the Just Buy Less Coffee YouTube page. And as always, if you're listening to the audio versions on Apple, Google, Spotify, make sure you're clicking that download button. Downloads are how we are ranked with other news and political podcasts. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was supposed to mention this earlier. Google Podcasts is going away. So if you listen to us on Google Podcasts, that's all moving over to YouTube Music. Google owns YouTube. So they are getting rid of the Google Podcast platform. All the podcast stuff's going to be on YouTube Music. So if that's how you hear us, make sure you're switching over to YouTube Music. Thanks, everybody. We're going to go into the Patreon subscriber-only conversation with Monique Worrell now. We will see everybody next time.